Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dawn of Yangchen chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 24, Loose Ends. So, kind of important chapter, though it doesn't cover that much ground. It takes its time to go over kind of the main thing that happens in it. But the kind of main takeaway really is just that it resolves immediately the potentially huge cliffhanger from the previous chapter, which almost hints at the idea that has Chai-Si just had Kavik killed, but no, it gets resolved here because of course he's in this chapter, but then they also have Yang Chen at the end of this chapter arrive back in Jondari, and we find out that, okay, so she's either lied or someone else has died, and the chapter does reveal that she has had someone else killed. So when she talks about taking out spies, she has in fact done that. That's why the chapter's called Loose Ends. They've been taken out of the picture. So let's jump in here with this one. So we start off in that, obviously, just recently we've been introduced to Jujinta, who is Kavik's partner on this mission here. He has a bit more experience than Kavik with this particular organization of errand runners. And we see his post-victory ritual here. So it started with a deep, fervent prayer to some unknown spirit. Then the knife thrower scratched a series of marks onto the wall, triangles upon cross marks upon straight lines, until an intricate geometric pattern emerged that somewhat resembled a bird spreading its wings. Kneeling in front of it, he whispered to himself, eyes closed, his mutters sounding like angry condemnations of some unforgivable crime, far worse than the light stabbing he'd given Shigoro. So, some interesting things about Jujinta here. We find out that he's somewhat religious to a certain degree, praying to spirits, and then he carves a very specific pattern on the wall in a certain way. You can't quite, in my mind, connect the dots and I think immediately figure out what the deal is with Jujinta. That reveal comes out much more clearly in later scenes with him, but once you have that information, that symbol begins to make a little bit more sense, and it feels like, oh, okay, that was there all along. So it's an interesting reveal with him. It's not huge, but it's a nice little reveal in terms of world building, and we will get to that when we get to it. For now, the main thing with Jujinta is just that we're getting that the dynamic between him and Kavik isn't great. As usual, Kavik is trying to be friendly with people, but they don't want to talk to him. In this line of business, I guess, there's not a lot of small chit-chat, going on. And so about the gist of their conversation is, are you a bender? Kavik asks him. Nope. And then he says, you anything but? And Kavik is like, okay, I guess you don't want to talk. So at this point, Tail comes over, who's obviously running this group of errand runners, and is like, okay, here's your first job. Disposal duty. So they're brought out to this section of beach, and there in the seaweed is 2 dead bodies that they have to dispose of. That's the mission. But this is the big sort of twist in a way of the chapter. One of the dead bodies is the character I've been pronouncing as Q, Q-I-U, but I got the audiobook today, and she pronounces it in the audiobook as Q. So the idea, I think, is that QI is another way of saying chi. So, chi-you, so Q. It's a tough one because it seems like even she, when she says the name a few times in a row, alters it slightly every time it is said. So it's a difficult one to say overall. And again, ultimately, he's not a hugely important character, but to Kavik, like he said in previous chapters, he is one of his only friends. After the family, Kavik and his family, have sort of been isolated from the rest of the tribe. What Kalyan did sort of made the community sort of abandon them to a certain degree. One of the only major friends that Kavik has is this guy who he was working for. And you could sort of tell, I suppose, from the missions that he was sent on, is that here is someone he knew was not going to send Kavik on missions that were going to be super duper illegal and doing pretty crazy stuff, to the point where this mission as an errand runner, disposal duty on dead bodies, is probably about the most kind of dark or kind of vicious thing that he's kind of had to do so far. So, you're really meant to kind of see this as like, this is a kind of notable thing for Kavik here, seeing his friend dead in front of him and him having to, dispose of him here. Now, the other dead body is revealed very quickly, I think in the next chapter or the chapter afterwards. I don't think it's really a spoiler to bring it up now, just because, it's not that big of a deal. But basically, the other dead body is Sadao, who is the minister who was part of Yang Chen's retinue, but was ultimately loyal to the Shang merchants. And the idea, of course, is that Zhangdu Hanshe, which is, I think, the actual pronunciation of it from the audiobook for Henshi, is what I've been saying, but it's actually like Hanshe. So he, I think, he in a previous chapter to Sadao was kind of like, oh, I know you think you're in trouble here, that you're going to get blamed for all of this, but no. You're fine. You're not burned with the organization. Go to Chaisi, tell her that I want the unanimity, and it'll all be good. But to Chaisi, and this is the key thing in all of this, she said in the last chapter that she's taken out Kavik as a spy, but she's also taken out Sadao as a spy, because of course he was basically a spy for Hanshe. And she has taken out Kyu because he came to her effectively with a letter that was sort of stolen from Yang Chen, and she has viewed that as being like, oh, you're a plant. This is so clearly a plant, because we know it's a fake letter that they just let him have because they felt like, oh, it's not going to do anything to affect Yang Chen, not realizing that it might affect other people if they also can see that it's kind of clearly like a fake letter that doesn't have actual information. So that's the sort of explanation behind what has happened here. We see that Chaisi gets rid of loose ends and makes sure, as we saw when she talked to Yang Chen, she gets rid of spies. She has this surprisingly cruel side to her when otherwise she seems very reasonable and normal. So interesting stuff. So we get a chapter cut at this point with the reveal of Kyu. Kavik gets sick straight away, just goes straight over. But the others sort of are sort of understanding of it. They're like, oh, first time with a raw corpse, huh? It'll get you for sure. And Kavik is kind of thinking like, why has this happened? Why is he here? He was meant to go to Taku, not Jondari. What's going on? And they go over like the sort of policy of the errand runners here. So they just basically say that it's what does it say here? Guilt by association. So they come up with like the story that they're all meant to have about what has happened on this mission. So they're like, everyone here has just seen persons named Kavik and Jujinta get on a boat with a fellow dressed like a high official from the Earth Kingdom and a youth with pockmarked skin, wearing the latest fashion from Bin and go on a voyage. Only Jujinta and Kavik came back. So they're kind of doing it like the fair way sort of here, where they're trying to get across that, like, we're not the really like unsavory criminals here. We do ultimately, abide by the law, but we do these missions and try to get away with it as much as we can. Jujinta asks, what did these two do to get so unlucky? And he says they're spies. Tail says they're spies. And if there's one thing the boss does not like, it's spies. And again, the boss is Chaisi, because they're here in Jonduri. And all errand runners work for her. That's how much control she has. So the other one, and you can sort of tell here just from the details here. He lifted the man's drooping foot-long beard and let it fall again. He's the real deal, a sage. So that's Sadao. This other one, he nudged Kyu's body with his foot, is a broker, come bearing gifts way too big for his worth. That's the surest way to tell someone's a plant attempt. So this is where Kavik realizes that, oh, in giving him this letter that someone of his level should not really have, and letting him try to sort of join errand runners somewhere else, it has made him stand out as like a clear like plant attempt, because there's no way you actually got that yourself. And you know, no one will obviously figure out the actual realization of like, you know, Kavik worked for Q, he got this thing for him, but Yang Chen is fine with that going out, and it's just this kind of weird misunderstanding that ultimately, as we find out by the end of the chapter, kind of in a way leaves them a little bit of an opening, because Kavik has not been found out yet to be a spy. Q was the one that she thought was Yang Chen's spy, because she found Q with a Yang Chen letter. So that's the deal from this whole chapter, basically. So they are sent out to dispose of the bodies, and we just get the details about this, which is that Kavik has to encase the bodies in ice, and they basically push them out to sea. And eventually the ice will melt, the current will take them away, and by the time it's melted, they'll be so far away, it'll be fine. So you can see that Kavik is in a bit of a daze through all of this. He's still stunned by the death of Q here. And he's just going along with it, trying to like, you know, roughly kind of keep things going. He does manage to stop Jujinta from cutting up the bodies to make the pieces smaller, because obviously he's a knife expert, obviously. So that's the only thing that he really has going for him. And it's just described that like he makes his way home somehow to Alkudan and Tayagum, and then the Avatar was waiting for him. By the looks of it, she just beat him there, maybe by minutes. She sprang to her feet when she saw him. "You're alive," she said, looking utterly relieved. So it shows that she cared about Kavik here, and would have been upset if he had been taken out in this moment. He is still so stunned that he's almost on the verge of like blaming Yang Chen for this, but he ultimately realizes that, you know, they both made this deal together knowing that it would be dangerous, and that they kind of realized that the death is on both of their hands, because they both agreed to go ahead with this plan where they let him take that letter away. So he's basically about to point the finger at Yang Chen, but then he realizes he has this thing in his hand, and it's the coin purse with the money he was paid for dumping Q into the water. And it's this kind of like dark kind of thing of like, I got paid for that. Like, I got paid for disposing of my friend's body, and it's like, this is the kind of harsh reality of the situation that he's in. And it's meant to be this really sort of like, you know, huge down-to-earth moment of like, people are dying here. That up to now, to a degree, the Shang merchants have been like, okay, they're not caring for their people, they're planning this thing with this potential weapon, whatever it is, but they don't seem like they're full-on assassinating people and doing the things that, say, the Earth King is known to do in this era. But here's an example of like, no, Jaisi means business, and she is having people taken out, including people who are basically allied with the Shangs themselves in Sadao as well. So very, very notable stuff there. So obviously what that means is that coming up, we're going to get quite an interesting situation as both Yang Chen and Kavik have to sort of come to terms with the mission having a lot more at stake than they kind of thought before, and, you know, in a way, can they keep going through all of this? So some interesting stuff coming up, but yeah, I it's one of those ones where, like, I think the first time I read through it, it was just kind of like, okay, Kia, I didn't really connect to him. But actually going through it in detail and realizing that, like, oh yeah, they said he was like actually close friends with him because he didn't have anyone else. So this is actually a somewhat notable death for Kavik, and just the nature of it happening so quickly, so bluntly, and that kind of stinger at the end of just like, I got paid to do that. It's kind of like, yikes. That's the situation that he's in, and is he okay with this in a way? So interesting stuff. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are in chapter 24. But other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.